Welcome, friends. Glad you made it. Got some wild stories for you tonight. All from deep in the woods. So kick back, settle in, and enjoy your stay. Let's begin. Story 1. The Pale Boy on the Rock. I was 13. My little sister was 10. We were out in the woods behind our grandma's house. It was one of the hottest days of summer. The forest was usually full of life. Kids partying, dirt bikes tearing around. But today it was completely dead silent. No birds, no bugs, just this weird stillness. You could feel something was off, like the whole forest was holding its breath. We walked to the center of the woods, and I just knew we shouldn't be here today. Something wasn't right, so we turned around to head home. There was a fork in the path, and when we got to where the two trails met again, I saw him. A pale, naked boy with long black hair, sitting in the fetal position on a rock. He didn't move. At first, I thought maybe he was hurt or lost, so I started walking toward him. But the closer I got, the more wrong he looked. His body was distorted, twisting and stretching in ways that didn't make sense. By the time I was right next to the rock, he was gone. Nothing left but the rock. My sister called out, "What is it, Anon?" I told her, "Nothing. Let's go home." We started walking again, and maybe 5 minutes later, I heard her scream behind me. I turned around. She was on the ground crying. I ran to her and asked what was wrong. She said, "I turned around, and I saw a pale boy sitting in the fetal position behind me. He looked up at me and disappeared." That was it. We didn't stop running until we were out of the woods. Never went back to that spot again. Story 2. The Shack That Banged Back. I was 10 years old, visiting a family friend in rural Kentucky. Their kid was a total jerk, but we were the same age, so we ended up wandering through the woods for hours anyway. We were deep in the forest, probably 5 miles in. No trails, no signs of roads. That's when we found it. This old school bus, almost swallowed by the woods. It made no sense. How could it even get here? A little further in, just before dusk, we found a tin shack, completely run down. No door, no lights. It looked abandoned, but we still felt creeped out. My friend spotted a broken window and said we should go inside and check it out. Why not, right? We're kids, dumb and curious. I peeked through the window. It was just one small room inside. An old recliner, a broken TV, coffee mugs, newspapers piled up like someone had used them for bedding. Right as I was about to say we should head back, bam! Loud banging on the inside walls of the shack. Not a little creak, not the wind. This was full force, something slamming into the walls like it wanted out, or wanted us in. We ran, full speed. Didn't stop until we made it back to the house, just before sunset. I swear to this day, if we hadn't gotten out of there when we did, we wouldn't have gotten out at all. Forget ghost stories. Whatever was in that shack was real. Story 3. The Klan execution in the clearing. I grew up in East Tennessee, Appalachian woods. The kind of place where the trees are dense, and the quiet isn't peaceful, it's heavy. One night, my Australian neighbor and I decided to go exploring in the woods near our neighborhood. Just two dumb teenagers looking for a thrill. At first it was quiet. Then we heard voices. One at first, then a whole group. It was strange, too deep in the woods to be normal. So we did what any curious kid would do. We followed the voices. After a while, we came to a clearing. Huge, lit up with torches or lanterns or something. And there they were. People in white robes, a whole bunch of them. My neighbor had no idea what he was looking at, but I knew. It was the Klan. We crouched in the bushes, staying dead silent, watching. They were chanting, shouting all the usual stuff I'd only ever heard about. It was surreal, like we'd stepped into a different time. Then they brought out a man, a bag over his head. My stomach dropped. They started shouting about traitors, race traitors, specifically. They made him kneel, and then one of the robed men pulled out a pistol. No ceremony, no hesitation, Just one shot, right in the back of the head. We both froze. We didn't even breathe. I don't know how we didn't scream or get caught. I don't know how we got out of there without them hearing us. But we did. We ran. We didn't stop until we were home. We told our parents. They told the police. But nothing ever came of it. No news. No follow-up. Just another night in the woods. And I've never been so glad we moved away. Story 4. The black shape in the Mississippi woods. It was Christmas. I was maybe 12 or 13, spending the holidays at my cousin's place in rural Mississippi. Tiny town, maybe 40 people, mostly woods. My cousin and I spent the whole day messing around outside, just being kids, playing in the forest like we always did. After dinner, my aunt told me we'd left our BB guns out by the stump in the yard. Said I had to go get them before dark. It wasn't pitch black yet, but the sun was definitely on its way out. The stump was maybe 30 yards from the front and 20 yards from the edge of some real thick woods. I walked out, saw the pistols sitting there, picked them up, and started to turn back. That's when I heard it, rustling in the woods. At first I figured it was a deer, nothing to panic about. But then I looked up. Right at the edge of the trees was something. It was darker than everything else, way taller and broader than a person, almost a solid black, but with a green tint. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I froze. My whole body locked up. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. We stared at each other for maybe 5 seconds. Felt like forever. I finally moved my leg, took one slow step back. Snap. Dry twig underfoot. The thing shifted. Not toward me, but backward. Like it was retreating. And then it just melted into the brush, like it had never been there at all. I didn't wait around. I ran all the way back to the house. Didn't say a word to anybody. Didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the trip. And the next year, when we came back for Christmas, I refused to sleep alone. Made my cousin and my brother share a room with me. They didn't ask why, and I never told them. Story 5. The Bright Light, by the Naval Airfield. Back when I was about 14 or 15, I lived in northwest Florida on what my family called the homestead. It was about 280 acres of land, mostly forest and old cotton fields, with a few houses scattered around, some family, some not. We'd moved there after we couldn't afford to live in town anymore. Not a great upgrade, to be honest. I remember this one morning in particular. It was around October or maybe November, cold for Florida, probably 30 to 35 degrees. It was around 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning, and I was standing at the end of our long dirt driveway, waiting for the bus. It was always late. While I waited, I just stood there staring at the sky, half awake, having my usual morning smoke. The airfield, Whiting Field, was nearby, so I figured any weird lights I saw would just be from training drills or aircraft. Then I got a call from my cousin. She drove the other school bus. She said our usual driver wouldn't be picking me up and asked if I needed a ride. I told her no. I was already out there, but whatever. I could miss a day. Right after I hung up, the sky changed. I mean that literally. 1 second, it was normal early morning blue. The next it turned a dull burnt orange. And then I saw it. A bright yellow-orange beam of light, shooting straight up into the sky from the direction of the airfield. It was like something out of a movie. My phone beeped once and shut off. Power in the house flickered, then went out completely. The beam climbed higher and higher, until it just vanished. And slowly the sky faded back to blue, like nothing had happened. I went back inside and didn't say a word about it for years. But here's the weirdest part. A year later, I was watching one of those UFO files videos on YouTube, something about Area 52 in Utah. They started talking about atmospheric masers, microwave lasers. One guy showed a video clip of one in action, and it looked exactly like what I saw that morning. I know what masers are. They're not supposed to work like that. Not like how people in conspiracy shows describe them. But that video was the same. Exactly the same. and I still have no idea what I saw. Story 6. The Creepy House and the Garbage Bag. This happened when I was 16. It was Christmas break. Everyone in the house had already left for work. It was early, like 4:30 or 5 a.m. I was used to waking up for school, so I was already up, just moving slow. Made breakfast, had some coffee, went outside for a smoke. The field in front of our house led to some woods, and I'd planned to take a walk out that way. Nothing too crazy, just wanted to clear my head. I packed a compass, some smokes, a lighter, and my notebook. No need for a gun. I wasn't planning to go deep. So I'm walking across the field, and I hear something up ahead along the ridge where the woods start. I duck down into the shallow culvert and crawl through the brush until I can see. And that's when I spot it. A house, not a cabin. A real brick house, older, maybe from the 70s. And the back door is wide open. At first I don't see anyone. Then this guy walks out. He's dragging a huge industrial trash bag. He throws it over his shoulder and carries it to a small shed nearby. Then another man walks out of the shed, pulls a pistol from his waistband, removes the slide and the magazine, and walks over to a small tin-roofed structure next to the shed. He lifts the roof and drops the pistol parts in. I hear a faint metallic tink, and then he turns and heads back into the house. I didn't wait to see what was in that bag. I scurried back to my place like a scared little animal, locked every door, and didn't leave my room until it was dark out, and the rest of the family came home. Later I told my mom and aunt what I saw. They called a family friend who worked as a sheriff's deputy. Apparently, he went and talked to the guy, said the guy used to be FBI. Or at least, that's the story the adults told us. Could have been true. Could have been small-town gossip. He lived on fenced-in land. Even the driveway had an iron gate with a keypad. Nobody ever followed up. No charges. No headlines. I never went near that place again. And I never forgot what I saw. Story 7. The Concrete Bunker with Antennas. This happened in March of 2005. I was 15, a few months after Hurricane Ivan had rolled through, messing up a lot of the area. My friend was staying over, and we figured we'd do what we always did. Go explore the woods. Only this time, we thought we might find some interesting hurricane damage. Right behind my house was about 40 to 50 acres of forest. Beyond that was an ATV trail. And past that, some 300 plus acres of old-growth land owned by International Paper. So we started with the usual patch behind the house. Mostly trash, shell casings, some buck scrapings, nothing too weird. We hit the ATV trail and walked along it for a while, maybe an hour. Then we came to this demolished clearing, like something had ripped through it. Probably storm damage, or maybe even logging, but it looked like a wreck. It was overgrown, tall weeds and brush, so naturally we decided to poke around in it. We made it through the brush, and found a dirt-graded road. Figured it was for forest maintenance or something. We walked along it, stopping here and there to look at animal tracks or whatever else. After a few hours, we hit another ATV trail, crossing the road. We looked west, nothing. Looked east, and that's when we saw it. A structure. Maybe a few hundred yards out. We walked up to it. It was small, about 9 feet tall, maybe 8 feet long, and 4 wide. Looked like a concrete shack. No windows, just this newer metal door that wasn't rusted. And on the roof, antennas, several of them. We walked around it and saw coaxial cables and wires coming up out of the ground, through a pipe, feeding into the building, and up the roof. My friend tried the door. It opened. He called me over. Inside it was empty except for a metal folding chair, a makeshift desk or shelf, a couple of old Playboys, and 2 CRT monitors hooked up to a VHS recorder. We powered on one of the TVs, just static, nothing. Then the other one. It was hooked up to a game camera. We watched it for a second, then heard a noise behind us. Didn't stick around to find out what it was. We turned everything off and left fast. We tried to go back once, weeks later, but we could never find the bunker again. The road we took was still there, but the clearing wasn't. Like it had never existed. Story 8. The Trailer Park and the River Fall. I was 12. My cousin was 11. It was the middle of winter, and we decided to go exploring in the woods. No one stopped us. No supervision. Just two kids wandering miles deep into the trees. We came across what looked like an old abandoned trailer park. Clothes and personal stuff were scattered all over the ground. Totally deserted. But it felt like people had been there not long ago. We kept going, deeper into the woods, until we found an old cabin. It was getting dark, and we knew we shouldn't go in, but of course we did. We stepped inside, and within minutes we heard it. The front door creaked open. Footsteps. Then what sounded like someone unloading things. We froze. There was no way out but the way we came in. Eventually, we crept out and ran. Just full-on sprinted through the woods. Then we hit a small ravine. My cousin jumped it clean. I didn't. I fell straight through the ice, into a freezing river. My cousin turned back, pulled me out, and we kept running. For 45 minutes, we could hear something behind us. Rustling, breathing, footsteps maybe. By the time we got back, the adults were furious. We told them what happened. They just said, "Don't ever go near Crazy Larry's again." And that was that. No explanation, no follow-up, just a warning, and silence. Story 9. The Logging Station Mystery. This started when my friend and I came across something in the woods, something we couldn't explain. It looked like an underground access point. Kind of like a sewer hatch. A big square foundation was painted with black and yellow caution lines, and in the middle was a solid metal hatch. What really made us freeze, though, was the camera, mounted on a tree, pointed straight at it. We were just staring at this setup when the hatch suddenly moved. A man climbed out. He was wearing bright orange and green utility coveralls. Looked like a contractor or something. He turned around, bolted the hatch shut, and walked away without a word. We didn't follow him. We just ran. That night we talked about it for hours. Then days. Then weeks. We had to know what it was. Eventually we decided to find it again. My granddad gave me a map. He used to hunt out there and remembered where the old railroad logging station was. That's where he thought we might have seen it. The tracks were probably gone, but the path would still be there. We waited for the weekend. Packed snacks, a flashlight. And I even told my mom, just in case we didn't come back. We left at 8 a.m. and hiked for hours. Cut through property lines, followed electrical towers, and finally hit a clearing where the old tracks used to be. They were gone, just gravel and rotted cross ties. But it was the right place. After a few miles, we found what was left of the logging station. Crumbled brick, broken beams, rusted saw blades. It looked abandoned for decades. No underground hatch, no camera. We figured that was the end of it. But months later, we went back. This time we brought a third friend and told our parents we were going camping. We made it to the site again, set up our tents, started a fire, cooked hot dogs, passed around some drinks we'd smuggled in. It was dumb teenage stuff, but when it got dark, that's when things got real again. We decided to look for the hatch, while tipsy of course. Split up with flashlights and walkie-talkies. I went one way, the others went another. An hour later, I got a call. My friend's voice whispering through the walkie-talkie. We found something. I ran to their location. There it was. The hatch, same one as before, only now there was a wooden box bolted to a tree above it, about 15 feet up. Inside the box, a camera, pointing straight down. Cables running from it into the ground. We searched the area, found an old name tag, or ID, on the ground. Couldn't read most of it, but we caught the name Artenu. Said he was an electrical engineer. Then the hatch squeaked. We bolted and hid. A man came up first, again in that orange and green gear. He carried a toolbox and some kind of device. Then another man followed. Same outfit, hard hat, holding a small wooden box like it was fragile. Neither said a word. The first guy closed the hatch and pressed something on his device. Lights came on. Rows of lights in the trees lit up like a runway, all strung through the forest. The two men walked along the lit path, away from us. Once they were gone, we crept back. Written on the hatch were the words "restricted," "no civilian access," and "electrical conduit. Secure, 1299 AA. Authorized personnel only." Still don't know what was under there. But the fact they used the word civilian, that still bothers me the most. Story 10. The miniature cabin in the woods. This happened just the day before I posted it. I made a thread about it, but it didn't last long. I went out for a walk to clear my head, just needed some air. It was bright and sunny, nothing creepy about the day at all. I wandered into a field, then into the woods next to it. No trails, no paths, just trees and underbrush. That's when I found it. A small pond, totally still. Next to it a single chair, and then a tiny cabin. I don't even know if I should call it a cabin. It was barely 3 feet tall and wide, like something a kid might try to crawl into for a game. It had a little bolted door, and a few air holes drilled into it. It was locked. At first, I backed away. Something about it felt wrong. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the door open, had to rip it off its rusty hinges. Inside was a shallow dugout space, like someone had tried to make it deeper. And there were items. A small electric fan, a battery, a rusty knife, melted white spots on the ground. I figured it was candle wax, camping chairs, plastic bags, and next to it all, this weird setup. 2 plastic tarps stretched over logs. One had a wooden square underneath it, like someone tried to build something low to the ground. It didn't feel like trash. It felt like someone had been using it for something. There were also lamps, actual lamps, hanging from one of the trees nearby, not battery-powered lanterns. Lamps, like from a house. That's when the goosebumps hit. I just stood there, staring at it all. This weird mix of backyard junk, and something that felt way more intentional. I ran out of there. Didn't stop until I was out of the woods. Later, I told my mom. She agreed it was creepy, but didn't say much else. I went back to fix the door. It didn't feel right leaving it wide open. But I haven't gone back since. I keep thinking about it. Not just what it was, but who it was for. Story 11. The Lake Walkers. I was 17, and trying to challenge myself, see if I could jog through the entire forest in under 9 hours. It was summer. My mom told me to go outside and do something, so I figured this would count. About 3 hours in, I stopped near a lake to take a break, just caught my breath, and stared at the water. That's when I saw someone. A person walked out of the lake. No splashing, no swimming up to the edge. Just walked right out, soaking wet. I figured maybe they'd been diving. Kinda weird, but okay. Then another one came out. Then another. Then another. About 15 people came walking out of that lake. No talking, no gear, no splashing or sound. Just walking. Straight out of the water, and into the woods. I didn't wait to find out more. I ran. Full sprint, heart hammering, legs burning. No clue where I was going. Just away. And of course, I got lost. It took me 7 hours to find my way out of that forest. Never saw any of them again. But I still think about it. That first guy coming out of the water, like it was nothing. And all the others behind him. Story 12. The Tree Thrusting Madman. I was 18, walking home from a friend's place. Normally, I'd take the long stretch of sketchy highway, miles of cracked pavement, and not much else. But that night, for some reason, I decided to take the forest path through the ranges. At first, it was fine. Peaceful, even. I stopped halfway to take a hit. Sat there a while, just listening to the sounds around me. Then I realized I didn't know where I was. The path was gone. Just trees and bushes, thick and dark. I wandered for what felt like hours, completely lost and a little too buzzed to think straight. Then I saw it. A tree. Big, old, gnarled. Looked like something out of a nightmare. And in front of it, a figure. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. Then I saw the motion. There was a man, naked, pressed against the tree, moving in this strange, wild way. And he was wailing. Not words, just this awful animal sound, like something choking and crying at the same time. I froze, didn't breathe, didn't move. Then I backed away slowly, turned, and ran. I didn't stop until I was back near the highway. Later, I asked around. That tree apparently has a reputation. People avoid it. No one really talks about why, but someone told me it was on the edge of a property owned by a guy with a pretty messed up reputation. So maybe it wasn't supernatural, but it was still the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. Story 13. Pig Ceremony in the Bamboo Forest. I was probably about 6 or 8 years old when this happened. My family took a trip to China to this super rural part of the South. The whole reason for the visit was to pay respects to a dead relative or something. I was too young to really get what was going on. Didn't care either. Grown-up stuff. We were staying in a tiny village somewhere way off the grid. Dirt paths. Bamboo forests. The works. Some of our relatives lived there, and we were staying in their house while they got ready for the ceremony. Me and my sister, we were bored out of our minds. So naturally, we wandered off. Right across from the house was this big bamboo forest. Looked cool, and it wasn't like anyone was paying attention to us. So we just ran in. No real plan, just kids messing around. I'd say we ran for about 10 straight minutes into the forest, just laughing and yelling and having no clue where we were going. Eventually, we stumbled across this old shack. It looked totally abandoned. Real crooked and sagging, with vines hanging off it like the whole thing had been forgotten decades ago. But right next to it was this fenced-off pen about 5 feet tall. I remember I had to climb a bit just to look over the top. Inside were 2 of the biggest pigs I'd ever seen, like massive. I was a little kid and they were basically my height. I was still gawking at them when my sister nudged me. "Anon," she whispered. "Look, do you see that?" She was pointing to the ground near the pig's feet. There, half sunken into the mud, were 2 human fingers. Not sticks, not roots. Fingers. Me and my sister just froze. Looked at each other, then looked back down. And before we could even react, this shaggy old man stepped out of the shack. Didn't say a word, just stared at us. We bolted, didn't even think. Just turned and ran all the way back through the bamboo, tripping over roots and yelling for each other the whole way. I don't remember if we told our parents. I think we might have been too scared, or maybe we didn't want to get in trouble for running off. But later that day, we had roasted pig for the ceremony. I didn't eat any. Story 14. Yarn Doll and the Watching Woman. This happened when I was 15. I was at this big get-together out in Kansas, some kind of extended family thing with a bunch of other teens my age. One night, someone suggested we play hide-and-seek in the woods. We had over 15 people playing, and the game was meant to last all night. If you got found, you either helped look for others, or you were just out. It was already getting dark when me and 2 other guys decided to head off deeper into the trees. We walked for a couple hours, just talking, laughing, keeping an eye out for hiding spots. Eventually, we found this little valley and figured it was a good place to rest. We laid down at the bottom, under this big old tree, and the other 2 guys fell asleep pretty quick. But I couldn't. The second we'd stepped into that valley, I'd felt off, like something wasn't right. The woods were dead silent. No bugs, no animals, just wind blowing through the leaves. It was that kind of silence that feels too quiet. Eventually, I got tired of laying there. I figured maybe I could find a better spot to hide, or at least shake the weird feeling I had. I got up and started walking. As soon as I left the valley, the feeling of being watched faded a little. But I started noticing something else. Ash. Little marks on the ground, like something had been burned. At first I thought it might have been from a campfire, but the more I followed them, the weirder it felt. That's when I saw it. Hanging from a tree branch was a yarn doll. Bright red. Blood red. It was just swaying gently in the wind. I freaked out, turned around fast, ready to head back to my friends. And that's when I saw her. A tall, pale figure standing just at the edge of the tree line, watching the two guys sleeping under the tree. She was thin, real lanky, black hair hanging down her back. Almost didn't look real. Then she turned and looked right at me. My heart dropped. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. She just stared. No expression, no movement, just locked eyes with me. Then without a sound, she glided backward into the trees. Not walked. Glided. That snapped me out of it. I ran straight back to the guys, shaking them awake. I told them what I saw, but they just laughed. Thought I was trying to scare them, but they could tell I was freaked out. Real freaked out. We packed up and headed back to the house. I still visit those relatives every now and then, but I never go back into those woods. Story 15. Campfire. Among the hidden people. This was out in the middle of nowhere. I'd been hiking for a while through some really thick forest, way off trail. Just me, my pack, and the trees. I wasn't expecting to see anyone, not even close. Then I stumbled across signs of habitation. Not just one person, either. It looked like a whole network. Tents, structures, worn down paths, all of it hidden well, like they didn't want to be found. It was subtle. If you weren't paying attention, you might have walked right past it. But it was clear people had been living out there for a while. I didn't stick around. Night was coming, so I backed away and set up camp a little distance off, far enough that I couldn't be seen. But I could still feel the presence of that strange little settlement. That night, I kept waking up, not because of animals or sounds. Just this uneasy feeling in my chest. Nausea. Anxiety. I don't usually get that way when I'm camping, so it stood out. Sometime past midnight, I heard distant singing. Not words, just voices. Soft, but steady. I ignored it and tried to sleep. Eventually, morning came. That's when I saw it. During the night, someone had lit a fire about 30 meters from my tent. Not a huge blaze, just enough to leave blackened earth and cold ash. They knew I was there, and they didn't bother me. But that fire, it felt like a message. I've spent a lot of time out in the bush. I know there are people who live off the grid. Homeless folks, loners, sometimes even travelers like me. But this was something different. I didn't see a single person, not one, and yet there were signs of so many. It was like they were hiding on purpose, like they wanted me to know they saw me, but not the other way around. That fire, it wasn't a welcome, it was a warning. Story 16. Burned footprints at the school camp. This happened last year at a school camp down south. We were staying in this old building, half house, half shack kind of thing, nothing fancy. Just some demountable structure stuck in the woods. After a long day of activities, we all messed around for a bit, until about 10:30. Then one of the supervisors made us head back inside to sleep. Middle of the night, I woke up. I heard something move outside, like a chair being dragged. Everyone else was asleep. Then through the glass door, I saw a figure walk past, just a dark shape. No details, but it was definitely a person. My heart was pounding. The glass door slid open, slow and quiet. Then I heard footsteps, coming in, walking right over to the dining table. I could hear the chair being pulled out. Then nothing, like whoever it was had just sat down. I stayed completely still under my blanket, peeking through this tiny gap where I could still see a sliver of the room. Then the door slid shut on its own, and the fireplace went out. When I woke up in the morning, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, but then I looked at the floor. From the glass door all the way to the chair were black, charred footprints, burned right into the floorboards. Story 17. The Dildo Tree and the Homeless Lady. I was about 16 when this all started. My friend had woods behind his house, and every now and then we'd wander around back there. Sometimes at night, we'd hear these weird sounds, moans almost like screams. One day we're walking through, just messing around, and we find this tree, strapped to the trunk, about chest height. Is this thing? A rubber toy, bright purple, realistic looking. Right next to it, hanging from a branch, was a pair of underwear. We just stared at it, didn't even know what to say. About a year later we were out there again playing airsoft with a couple friends, and we find the tree again. Same spot, same toy, still there. But this time it looked wet, fresh, like it had just been used. There were more underwear in the branches, and a beat-up adult magazine on the ground, pages stuck together and half buried in the dirt. We were looking at it when we heard something, rustling behind us, fast. Someone running straight at us. Then we heard her yell, "Get away from my toy, you wackos." We turned around and there she was. A woman, white, maybe 30. Clothes torn up, hair wild, eyes crazy. We ran. Didn't look back, just kept running until we were clear of the woods. That's when we realized, this whole time all those weird sounds we'd been hearing, it was just a homeless lady, doing things, with a tree. Story 18, Shovel Man and the Buried Girl. This happened during a solo hiking trip, backwoods, deep in the middle of nowhere, bears everywhere, so I set up a hammock tent in a tree. It was getting late. I ate an MRE and settled in for the night, maybe 20 feet off the ground. That's when I heard it, shuffling below me. Voices, muffled, low. I looked down through the mesh. There was a man down there. He had a shovel in one hand, and a bag in the other, pacing around in the dark. I didn't move, just watched. He was talking to himself. "Gotta bury the pieces, so she doesn't show up again," he muttered. "Gotta keep her from escaping." I slowly reached for my sub 2000 from my backpack, quiet as I could, unfolded it, aimed it right at him from above, just in case, and I waited. For 3 hours I stayed like that, barely moving, muscles cramping, eyes locked on him. Eventually he finished digging, tossed the bag in, and started covering it up. Then he left. I waited a little longer, then climbed down, packed up my gear, and went to check the spot where he'd been digging. That's when I saw it. Polka-dotted fabric, a child's shirt, sticking out of the dirt. I hiked out fast and reported everything to the authorities. Turns out, it was the body of a little girl, 4 years old. She'd been missing for 3 weeks. The guy had taken her, and I'd been right above him the whole time. Story 19, The Camper Circle Encounter. I was 15 at the time, staying the weekend at a friend's place in small-town Wisconsin. His house was about 7 miles outside of town, surrounded by thick woods and not much else. We were waiting for his dad to fall asleep, so we could sneak out, get stoned, and wander through the woods with some flashlights. Around 1:30 in the morning, we grabbed our jackets, a couple flashlights, our weed in a bowl, and slipped out the window. After walking a bit, we found what looked like a deer path, and followed it. Eventually we came to this clearing. It was perfect. Dead center of the woods, completely circular, maybe the size of a small water tower's footprint. The air felt still, heavier, somehow. We spotted a path leading left from the clearing, and decided to explore it. A few hundred yards in, my flashlight caught something glinting in the dark. We got closer. It was a dovetail chair, old wooden, nailed to a tree about 2 feet off the ground. Hanging over one of the nails was a little necklace locket, open and empty, swaying gently. That's when things started to feel wrong. We kept walking and started seeing more objects on the ground. Broken glass, scraps of window frames, old tires, rusted out lawn chairs, even broken toys. It was like someone had dragged the remains of a house into the woods and scattered it around. We pushed through some brush and found a second clearing, but this one wasn't empty. There were campers, not people, campers. Old broken down trailers. Some were completely rusted out. Others looked like they'd been patched together with random bits of wood and metal. Little storage sheds were collapsed, or leaning at weird angles. Tables had been cobbled together from junk. We crept forward and started looking around. On one of the makeshift tables were dime store novels, torn-up comic books, photos from the 1930s to the 50s, all inside an old cookie tin. There were children's toys, plastic soldiers, and porcelain dolls, cracked and covered in moss. We stood back to back with our flashlights, scanning the place like we were in a movie. My friend didn't want to open any of the campers, but I convinced him to check one out with me. The thing was hideous, painted in what looked like layers of dried glue and Bondo. I grabbed the latch and tried to open it, but it was stuck. So I tied my coat sleeve to the handle, and we both pulled. It popped open hard. I shined my light inside. To the left was a small dresser. Above it, stuck to the wall by a knife, was a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but the knife, the tip lined up perfectly with the center of my forehead in the reflection. I staggered back, fell out of the camper on top of my friend. He asked what happened, but I couldn't even speak. Just ran to the door and slammed it shut. Told him we needed to leave. We backed away from the area, heading toward the path, both of us shaken. Then I turned around to give the place one last look. That same camper, the one we just fought to get open. Its door fell off, not swung open, fell off, straight outward. A rotten tree beside it cracked and smashed one of the camper's windows at the same moment. We were done. We ran, past the nailed chair, ran straight across the first clearing, breathing hard, hearts racing. But as we flashed our lights around to check if anything was following us, we realized something worse. Stuff from the camper site, the comics, toys, pieces of furniture, was now scattered throughout the clearing, like it had followed us. We booked it back to his house, climbed up the deck, jumped through the window, and pulled the shades. Sat on the floor, sweating, shaking, hearts thudding in our ears. Eventually we passed out with every light in the room still on. Next morning, we tried to make sense of it. My friend said something that stopped me cold. He told me that while we were running, I was holding on to him, dragging on his sleeve like I was about to fall. Said I was crying, making this awful face. Only, I was ahead of him, the entire time. I got to the clearing first, climbed the deck first, closed the window behind us. I wasn't behind him. We both went silent. I got up to open the shades. There was a long vertical crack running the entire length of the window. We were both sick for the next couple weeks. Fevers, nightmares, no appetite. We never spoke about what happened after that. 9 years later, we live in different states. He's a chemist. I travel a lot for work. We still talk from time to time, but we've never gone near those woods again. All right, fellas. That about does it for this episode. We've gone down the deep end in this one, and really heard some bizarre things. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to subscribe, as there is a lot more stories where these came from. This was from the depths of the board. See you next time.